We had quite the response for today's webinar, so we know that you all are excited to jump right on in, and so are we. Well, I think at this point, I think it's time for us to get going. It's about 4 minutes after the hour. Thank you all for joining and for putting in the chat your name, where you're joining us from, and just sharing a little bit about the space that you operate in, if it's coaching, if it's facilitating, if you're in DEI, we just love to hear your perspective. And it also helps us to know who we're speaking to out in the group. So if there are specific angles that we can hit on, we would love to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, but I do want to draw your attention to a definition here on the screen. So today we're going to talk about cultural intelligence in practice. And some of you might be thinking, well, what in the world is cultural intelligence? And some more of you might be thinking like, well, let's take a step back and really define what do you mean by culture? So we've got a definition on the screen just to ground us. And as you can see, culture is the shared pattern of beliefs, values, assumptions, and behaviors that distinguishes one group from another. It's the taken for granted ways we think and behave. So it's important for us to ground ourselves in this definition because often it's assumed when we say culture, we're talking about race. And that's not at all exclusive to what we mean when we say culture. So again, very excited to have all of you again. We are going to talk about cultural intelligence in practice, which is Lucy's new book. So, first off, congratulations, Lucy. Very excited to dive into this topic as it is truly the foundation for this session. So, before we get going, I'll introduce myself. My name is Carolyn Mims. I am the Vice President of Business Development here at the Cultural Intelligence Center. And I have two of my favorite co-panelists here joining us for today's webinar. First off, we have Lucy Butters. Lucy, I'm going to kick it over to you to just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Lucy Butters. Delighted to recognize some names as they come in who will know me through my training. I train, I have my own company, and I'm also a master facilitator with the Cultural Intelligence Centre. And guess what? Over the last 2 years, I've written a book and it's due to be published, and I'm very delighted to be with you all to share some of that today.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Lucy. And we also have Quentin Pretorius. Quentin, can you share a little bit about who you are?
So my name is Quentin Pretorius, happy and glorious. And for everyone phoning in or logging in from South Africa, it's Quentin Tshwane, previously known as Pretorius, and the South Africans will fully understand what that means. And I lead immersive experiences to deepen people's understanding of cultural intelligence. So it's more than just teaching about cultural intelligence. It's about creating immersive experiences where people can go beyond just the theory of it, but actually see it lived out in real life. And so through storytelling, engaging, some hands-on activity, recently integrated some Lego experiences to unlock aha moments for people. And I really believe that learning happens both ways. So as much as we are teaching, we're learning at the same time. And so there's just something really beautiful about moments like this, where we have over 200 people on a call today. And so
Yes.
200 new things we possibly could learn. And so I'm really excited to be a part of the conversation today. And really well done, Lucy, on writing this book. And I was
Indeed.
the first time I met you back in Grand Rapids, I think it was 2016. And to see how far you've come from there, it's just been an amazing journey to watch you on this journey. So really excited to be
Yes.
there.
Yes, yes, I concur. We are all very excited. And what's so beautiful about today's topic is, for some of us, we've heard of cultural intelligence. And even if we have not specifically heard of cultural intelligence, we've heard of a number of different frameworks on really how to see change and to bring about change and to bring about some of that self-awareness, right? That would incite action. But what's so beautiful about CQ is it truly is practical. And that's what we're going to explore throughout today's conversation. So before we get started and getting into the nitty-gritty of using cultural intelligence in practice, I want to make sure that we're level set. We've already talked about the definition of culture. So now let's dive into CQ. Before we put it into practice, and also let me say this, you might hear us reference cultural intelligence as CQ, and we're talking about the same thing. But before we dive into CQ in practice, it just makes sense for us to talk about what is CQ, what is it all about, and what are those four capabilities? So Quentin, I'm gonna kick it over to you. Can you share what the four capabilities of cultural intelligence are?
When I do training for the CQ Center, I normally ask my participants to do this to see if they're with me. And so now we have 210 people that are going to
Oh,
check if I know what the four
uh-oh.
capabilities are. So CQ Drive is your motivation to engage in multicultural situations. Then we have CQ Knowledge, and basically that is understanding how similar and different cultures are. Then we have CQ Strategy, which talks about planning, awareness, and checking once you've been through a multicultural engagement. And then the last capability is CQ Action, where the rubber meets the road. When should I adapt?
Yes.
When should I not adapt? And under each of those capabilities are sub-dimensions that make up the beautiful capability of cultural intelligence. I hope I did that justice. And if there's anybody in the chat box that would like to add something, feel free to correct me, but thank you.
Well, Clinton, I think you passed the test. So great work, great job. And you set them in order. So bonus points there. But as you can see for everyone who's joining us, as you can see, it's cultural intelligence doesn't just start with the drive, right? Or the intention or the motivation. And it doesn't even just end with the knowledge, right? And in many cases, when we think back to different forms of development, that's where the buck stops, right? But it moves beyond just that drive and that knowledge, and you get into the action, you get into the strategy to put that action into place. And that's what makes CQ stand out. Now, let's get into this book. Lucy, we're all dying to know what moved you to collect stories from practitioners around the world and turn those into cultural intelligence in practice. And, along those lines, what were you hoping to offer other facilitators and educators?
I've been looking at people as they come in saying, they're in professional development, they're trainers, they're coaches. That's what I am. My experience of people in that space is that they always want to keep learning, they always want to keep developing themselves. And, I've been through lots of cultural intelligence certifications and training experiences. And I was thinking, what next? As Dr. David Livermore launched his CQ Fellows program, which I was hugely fortunate, surprised, delighted to be accepted onto. And through that, he had a program, a year-long program, thinking about how do you develop your thinking in your space. So for me, my space is always about people and developing and working with people. One of the questions David often asked thinking was, what's the problem you're going to fix? And for me, who works with people, I want you all to know you are never a problem to be fixed. And so I kind of translated that question to what's the opportunity, and I work training trainers, and people often come back when they start their own sessions going, how should I have done that? Or what would be your suggestions for? And trainers, we often work in isolation. Even when we're in an organisation, we're the person that's responsible for whatever remit that we have, kind of thing. So we're often in isolation. So that thought of reaching out to other experts in this field around the world and getting a sense of place, purpose, people, how that impacts, really inspired me, really in part for myself. I wanted to hear. So I thought I'll write out to these 12 amazing people, thinking maybe 6 would say yes. They all said yes. And I think in that, we also hear something about this community and the generosity and the wanting to support others, because they gave me their time, they gave me their trust to write something that represents them well, all these different things. And so the opportunity I want for others is that they feel that there's a resource of somebody that hears them, that has shared what they're going through, that has ideas for how we build and use our own cultural intelligence and how we can share it with others. So Quentin has been one of the early readers of that book, and he said to me, I kept thinking, yeah, me too. I've had this experience too. And and that he felt he was part of a conversation. And that just made my heart sing. That's what I
Oh,
want for this book, for
that's
people who read it.
That's wonderful, Lucy, and it's so on brand to who you are. Just an authentic individual looking to help others. And I strongly believe like some of the best experiences are rooted and grounded in those defining moments we experience ourselves. I do want to share something really quickly before we move on and get further into today's discussion. You all might have questions that pop up as we go deeper into some of the concepts of cultural intelligence in practice. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We've got some session administrators that are going to collect them all. We're going to do our very best to answer them all toward the end of today's session. And if you feel a bit uncomfortable and you want to remain anonymous, please feel free to use the QA option at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit your questions there as well. We have folks collecting them from both fronts, and we will do our best to make sure that we address your questions. Now, Quentin, I want you to think about when you're leading a session or coaching a leader, or even supporting a team. How do you consciously use your cultural intelligence in the moment when working with others?
I would like to say that after 12 years of working with CQ, that it comes naturally, and that I wouldn't have to think about putting CQ into action. And
Yeah.
so it's like a fish in water. A fish doesn't know it's in water until it's out of water. And so I'm often aware of not using the capabilities when it's failed. So I remember many times when it's failed. And one comes to mind. I was having a client dinner before I was about to engage with this client. And the slogan of this company was something along the lines of free to be you. And so I was licensed to be myself. And we had this client dinner. I remember getting home, telling my wife what an incredible dinner it was, and I'm looking forward to working with this client. And that was Thursday evening. And Monday morning, I got an email from the global head of HR asking for a meeting. And
Oh boy.
had offended somebody at that dinner. And I realized, oh man, that free to be you didn't say that I could do anything I wanted. And I let my guard down and I didn't tap. And so when I look back at that, I could have used my CQ strategy and
Mhm.
action a little bit more to read what was happening around the table at the time and to tap into this idea of listening with a critical ear, like listening with CQ in the back of my mind. And so um, I, I, I know of times when I've failed at it rather than when I've succeeded at it. And so as I'm thinking about Lucy's book, particularly when we do CQ training, there's an activity we do that talks about if then. So if this happens, then we,
Yes.
and you almost give people the opportunity to rehearse things that they see on everyday kind of engagements that allow us to pause, actively listen, and then respond. And I
Mhm.
think what Lucy's book has done for me is created a number of scenarios that help me think about, oh, I read this and I've got a world famous person on the other side of the planet that has gone through this, and I can now begin to enact some of those things. And so I think it's an extension of the CQ training that many of us have been on, particularly that if-then exercise. And so I know Lucy has got a whole thing around listening. And so Lucy, I know you on a mission to talk about CQ and listening, and I really appreciated the fact that you included that in your book. And so Caroline, if you're me asking Lucy a question as to why she felt listening is a capability around CQ, and what does that mean for her?
Yeah.
I think as well what you just shared there, Quentin, everybody has these moments.
Mhm.
And there's different things going on, because for me, I also think, you know, that bit when I'm relaxed or when I know somebody or when I'm absorbed in my own head, I'm not, you know, and it can
Yes.
happen, you know, at your computer or wherever you're doing emails without really sitting back, as well as in the training room. There's lots of spaces.
Yes.
And there's also an element of, but did that person let you know at the end or give you any opportunity to think? You know, there's always a two-way dance or a group dance going on. And that's part of the complexity of it all. But that bit you asked there, Quentin, about listening, for me, I would love to see it as part of the CQ framework, because listening to ourselves as well as listening to others, absolutely. And as you say, I think it's a really useful tool to bring in, because we learn how to listen in a cultural context, who we listen to, when
Yes.
we listen, all these different things. So yes.
Yes.
Sorry, Caroline.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say that there's often when we think about listening, we always talk about listening to others, but there's something really important about listening to ourselves and being aware of how we've been triggered in those moments. Or in the South African context, we'll say when somebody touches you on your studio, like they're touching away. And sometimes if we're not attuned to that, we actually get ourselves into a lot of trouble. And so I think there's something really important about listening to ourselves and being aware of what's actually happening inside of ourselves, and then
Yes.
that we have inside of ourselves around that. So yeah, there is something really important about that.
Absolutely. Oh, and it can be applied in so many areas of life. It should be applied, right, to all facets of life, and even across all age groups, across all, different global regions, having that discernment and really thinking about, how do I feel in this moment? How am I interpreting it? What's really happening? And where's that gap or that potential for misunderstanding or to lean into understanding? So before we move on to the next topic, Lucy, I want to go back to you. In the book, you asked some practitioners what's most challenging about developing cultural intelligence in real time. Can you share some of your findings from those discussions?
Indeed, I could. That was an explicit question I asked all the people I interviewed. You know, what do you find hardest to develop about your cultural intelligence? And I'm just going to say, nobody said knowledge. And I think that's quite important, because it's often this space, I think you said earlier, Caroline, where we focus. I feel good when I get a bit of knowledge. It's not, we're all professionals. It's not the spaces that we work in where people find it hard to acquire knowledge. And there was a mix between the drive and the strategy, but half the people, it was the action piece, the adapting, exactly as Quentin was just saying, that bit. I feel some tension, you know, am I going to freeze? Am I going to fight? Am I going to go into flight? And it's not quite settled with me yet about how I bring this into my training more frequently. I think what Quentin's doing with your immersive experiences, that is that action piece. And I think there's often a tension between people feeling that they've learned and developed and people being able to do what's important to be able to do. You know, that
Yeah.
there is something in that accent piece, because I never asked the question about what do you think capability is most important. I never explicitly asked that of everyone. But a few people did say, I think this is most important. And again, it was the drive and the strategy piece. No one said the action piece of their own bat. And I'm aware that often it's the bit that comes at the end of training, you know, that kind of, and I think there is something for us to really think about how do we become comfortable with discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a
Mm-hmm.
huge thing in terms of how we then respond to others.
Yeah, and that's also an indicator of growth, right? When we even think about in the physical human sense, when we're younger and we're kids and we're growing, what tends to happen? Your limbs are sore, they're stretching, your bones are stretching. And you start to kind of get used to that discomfort. That same thing has to happen here along your journey of cultural intelligence. I saw someone post in the chat. It says, it seems to me that an important aspect of CQ is not that you get everything right and perfect, but that you have that learning attitude to listen and evolve as you learn. And that's spot on. You're not going to always be perfect. And that is, quite frankly, contrary, right, to the foundation of cultural intelligence in the first place. We're very curious to hear from the audience. So we'd love for you to go over to the chat and using one word, what's most challenging about developing your CQ? So, in your opinion, type in the chat, what's most challenging about developing your CQ? Others aren't ready. Family. Oh, that's an interesting one. Humility, the self-awareness. Oh man, I'd argue, yeah, that's the same for me. That self-reflection, a multicultural teens, unconscious bias. That's coming up a few times. The culture changing, patience, pride.
Yeah, I think that one about there's just so much to know. So we have to be in a state of not knowing. And I think that's
Yes,
one of the lessons that really came through for me. Even
yes.
language, we often don't know what someone means by the language, even when it's the same language, the emphasis or understanding you have of the word. And that bit about not knowing in and of
It,
itself can feel uncomfortable for a
absolutely.
trainer or a coach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, here's the thing. Using cultural intelligence ourselves, that's one thing. But helping others grow at it is a completely different ball of wax, right? So I want to dive into that concept, sharing cultural intelligence with others. Quentin, I'd like to go to you first here. What's a common misstep you've seen when people try to share CQ with others, when you're really trying to develop their cultural intelligence or assist other people in their journey? What's some of the missteps you see?
It's almost like people have seen our questions and our prompts a little bit before we arrived here, right? So,
Right? I know.
so I want
Is
to
my
I want to
computer
lift off
hacked?
of, yeah, because for me, it's what Vincent shared around the fear of rejection, that
Mm,
there's very little space for tolerance for mistakes. And so people are afraid to make them. For example, that dinner mistake I made at that client dinner, that
yes.
eventually became that I never got the work. And so how
Mm,
much I compromise or adapt so that I get the work, but then I'm not being true to myself and not knowing where I can make a mistake or how I can make the mistake. And then coaching people through when I've made a mistake in this space, how do I respond to that? Because I think I remember my first unconscious bias training with Sandra Upton, and she gave me some really great advice in terms of when people make mistakes. Because when I make a mistake, my first initial response is to say, Caroline, it wasn't my intention. I didn't mean to, but actually I've hurt you through the process. And so Sandra Upton's words always stay in my head is to, are you okay? I understand what I've done has hurt you, rather than jump to my intention. And I can
mm,
come back to my intention a little bit later. but it's about how do we create the environment where we can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. If I think of my children growing up, when my daughter or my son started walking for the first time and they fell, I never reprimanded them saying, "You're stupid, you've never walked, like, why are you falling?" I understand
Right.
falling is part of the learning to walk. And I think
Mm.
grace and more patience with people as they start to develop this capability to be more effective in this space. So for me, that is the biggest challenge, is how do we create space for us to make mistakes beyond just the 4 hours that we have online or in a training, but how do they get up afterwards? I think that for me has been one of the biggest challenges.
Wow, Quentin, that's so profound. And I think we all could relate to thinking of small children learning to grow and just that, experience that cycle of falling, picking yourself back up and being comfortable with falling until you fall less and less and less. Imagine a world if that was just the tone, right, in every facet. Oh my goodness. Well, my friends out there in the audience, and for those who might be watching this later, that's why we need all of you to do that work of cultural intelligence to help us create that world one day at a time. Thank you for that story, Quentin.
Sure.
Lucy, when those challenges show up, like that self-awareness, that being comfortable failing and making mistakes, when those show up in your work, Lucy, how do you help people move past them in a constructive way?
I think one of the interviewees, Dr. Anandita Banerjee, who's in India, you know, she said you have to go out prepared to make mistakes.
Mm,
And because we're working with humans,
right.
crucially, if we're working with groups, when you used the word earlier, perfect, you cannot be perfect for everyone in the group. It's not possible. And you have to
Not possible.
hold that, it's kind of it's just not possible. And so
Right.
it's thinking through, and I think there's something about how you hold space. It's really
Mm,
important that it's okay, even in how Quentin was giving the example from Dr. Sandra Upton there about rather than jumping to intention, to jump to how eh, sorry, my brain has just gone. I've just had a moment. But
Yes.
you know that bit about rather than trying to defend, to
right.
accept and explore and lean in. And I think if you can model that, then you help others too as well. And the bit about self-awareness, the bit about knowing when you're developing and when you've made mistakes and being able to share that. Nearly
Hmm.
all the interviewees said if they can share something that says it makes it okay for others to go,
That's right.
yeah, this has happened to
That's
me
right.
too, or whatever. And so I think there's something about, somebody used the word vulnerability earlier. And I remember years ago on a training program I was running across 9 different Arab countries, one of the trainers saying you have to be prepared to be vulnerable as a trainer.
Yes.
And I just think
Yes.
that's quite true. You need to give something of yourself. And for me, I think I know I'm more culturally intelligent because I now know when I've made mistakes and not done well with other people. And in the past, I think I would have just judged the other person. Oh, they've gone off in a bit of a mood or whatever. Whereas now I think, oh, yeah, I could have done things differently. And just
Mhm.
even that thought in and of itself, I think, is a sign that I've become more culturally intelligent because I can spot that there were opportunities for me to do something differently. And
Yes.
spotting that gives us a toolbox for the next time it might happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Indeed. Indeed. I'm sorry, Quentin, did I cut you off? Are you going to say something?
No, I was just listening to Lucy and agreeing with her. And sometimes it's much easier to do it retrospectively than in the moment. And
Indeed.
so that's why I think CQ strategy is so helpful, because it allows you to go and check back and get feedback so that you can get better going forward. And then I suppose, and it seems like it's following a trend with Lucy in terms of when I'm feeling like I've made a mistake and I didn't get the work and I'm feeling really down, I always have to tap back into my CQ drive, reminding myself, why am I doing this? What is my motivation to do this? And knowing that that is my route, it does help me pull through sometimes when it's really difficult. Because I must be honest, sometimes I was saying to some people earlier this week, sometimes it would be much better just to talk about butterflies and trees than to talk about this, because sometimes it can be really difficult in this kind of space.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
Indeed,
But not
indeed.
nearly so interesting or rewarding. I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, as most challenging things are, right? There's the greater that investment, the greater the reward, right? So the more you put into something, the more you get out of it. I think we've all, heard some variation of that saying at some point throughout our lives. So thank you both for sharing, and thank you both for being vulnerable in this space and sharing with us the times that you've maybe had a misstep or a misunderstanding. I know that I feel comfortable speaking on behalf of the audience and saying that goes such a long way for all of us as we think through our journey in CQ and what that looks like, and we even think of some of the times where we've had missteps as well. Now, I
And
do have a question
sorry,
for
I just got
both.
one more
I'm
thing
sorry.
to say as
Yes.
you were talking there, and I was talking to a participant that was in a program that I ran 2018,
Mhm.
and she said, "Was that you?" And I said, "Yes." It was such a terrible session, and she said, "No, it wasn't. It was such a powerful session." And she then related back moment by moment what happened in the session. And I think for many of us on the call, we tend to be very harsh on ourselves when
Yes.
because we only normally get the negative feedback, and people that have had a
Yes.
positive experience actually never get the opportunity to give back to us. And so maybe not only to be gracious with others, but actually to be gracious with ourselves as we go through
Mhm.
moments.
Oh, that's such great advice. Such great advice, Quentin. I'm guilty of that. Harsh on myself, and then it'll take me down this path of ruminating. Did I speak to action the right way? Did I tie it into strategy? And to
Mm,
your point, for many of our participants, they're salivating and eating it up because it was so impactful for them. Now,
yeah.
for the two of you, so either of you can choose to jump in first. But I want to ask you this question. If you could give one practical tip to a trainer, facilitator, or coach who wants to introduce cultural intelligence in a way that really lands, what would it be? And to the audience, here's where you grab your pen and paper. Because if there's one takeaway from this session, this is it. So, Quentin and Lucy, I'll repeat that question. If you could give one practical tip to a trainer, facilitator, or a coach who wants to introduce cultural intelligence in a way that really lands, what would it be?
I'm hoping Lucy's going to answer first because she's got the benefit of 9 other people that she
And
interviewed to get this right. So
and what I would say right
Lucy.
from the get-go, you built that up, Caroline, but there's never just one way, because there's different needs and there's different purposes and there's different starting points. And so the crucial thing is for you to be listening for that, so that you can make the connection. If there's no if it's totally abstract and there's no connection for the person in terms of the context that they're in, then it's kind of like it's a vagueness. But if people can connect with their life and their role and their relationships that they have, then that's so you need to be listening and questioning. These are two crucial things. And for Quentin, when you were saying earlier, and we go into the negative, and I think two really important questions for all of us: what did you do well? What would you
Mhm.
do differently if you did it again? Because going down a I did something wrong is not useful. You don't grow from that.
yeah.
What
Right.
could you do differently? And what did you do well? Back yourself. It's that These two questions I think are super useful.
So Caroline, that question you ask, it reminds me of when I met Lucy for the first time back in 2016. The two of us were in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We had the opportunity to drink the CQ Kool-Aid. It got into
Nice.
bodies. And then both of us went back to our own hometowns, one in the south of South Africa and Lucy back in Scotland. And we changed everything about what we were doing to CQ. And nobody pitched up for any of us because we believed in the stuff so much that we didn't do what Lucy's talking about, is adapting to what was actually happening in our local context. And it was
Yes.
years later when I went on the second global conference that I got to meet some other incredible people that are in Lucy's book, that I realized CQ makes sense in one context. It doesn't necessarily make sense in another context. And it's really important for me to be able to position it in a way that makes sense. And so for me, the question I always ask is, so what? What is the so what of the participants that I'm engaging with? How is this going to be helpful to them to be a better leader? How is this going to be better, help them to position themselves in an organization to have greater impact on a real business need that they need? And I think that has been my greatest learning over the last couple of years. It's around saying, how do I contextualize it for every particular space that I find myself in? And the framework is malleable in that way that you can
Yes,
adapt
it
it.
is.
And so we've had clients that have asked us, can you come and talk about allyship? And myself and Ed have said, actually, the framework talks about allyship and you follow these 4 things. And I know that you've done things around sales. And if you use the framework around sales, and so CQ is not a static, but I think it's very malleable in the way it can be used as for trainers and for us on the call.
Absolutely correct. You're spot on. That listening is so key. So if you're thinking right now, you're in the audience and you've been kind of thinking about this, like, yeah, but how would I bring something like CQ to my organization or to my community? That's the heart of it. What's most important to your community right now? Is there a challenge your community or organization is looking to solve? Maybe it's not a challenge. Maybe it's preparation for something. Maybe it's international growth, or maybe it's to merge with another organization. Whatever that is, the point we want you all to take away is that listening is so key. Being curious, really digging in and understanding the landscape before you bring in a solution. And hey, listen, we've all been there, right? We've all sat through a session or a series of sessions and the info's going right over your heads. And you're thinking, this doesn't apply to me. I could totally be making a coffee right now, right? We've all been in that situation. So to prevent it, the step is easy. And it's really listening and observing and being curious. And as Quentin said, using that CQ framework to bridge the gap. Thank you all. I really appreciate your feedback there. Now, before we get into opening the forum for questions, I do want to just touch on, because we are running short on time. So I just want to touch on cultural intelligence in the creative process. So I'm going to go to you, Quentin. You've designed learning programs for diverse audiences and for people really across the world. When you're creating something new, either like a workshop or a coaching program or even a leadership module, how does cultural intelligence shape that creative process?
I think for me, I think about, can the participant see themselves in the content that I'm developing? And so CQ helps me get out of myself and put myself in the shoes of somebody else that is going through this. And so whether it's in the slides I'm creating, whether it's in the way I'm positioning myself, and it's even to the smallest, and it sounds silly, but like the shoes I wear on a particular day when I'm facilitating a particular session, that will point people in a particular direction around that. So I think when I'm planning a workshop and engaging with people, it's the framework that allows me to take a step back and look at people from a different perspective and say, can they see a bit of themselves in what we're doing today? And then that somewhat makes it relevant for them to plug into it. And like I said, a simple thing of wearing a pair of shoes or sneakers does
Mhm.
somebody. So it's small things like that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You know, I have a follow-up to that. Lucy, when you think about the stories from your book and all of the conversations that you had with many of the CQ practitioners, is there a particular story, or maybe even from your own perspective, where CQ changed what you built for an audience? So maybe CQ influenced who it was centered for or whose voice was heard. Can you share a story or an instance from your own practice where CQ would have changed kind of course of direction?
Well, I kind of everything that Quentin just said, and I hope that every time somebody creates a program, they go through that process of thinking, who am I speaking to? How do I want this to land? All these different things. You know, that's really important that you're thinking about the group you're with. One of the things I'll also share is when I was putting the book out, early drafts, people came back with opposite suggestions of what I should be doing. It was not possible to do them both. And I think that's really important as well, to hold that you need to make decisions that and that it can't be right for everyone, but you can talk about that within your training as well. You can be honest and share and maybe do things in lots of different ways and highlight that. But for me, one of the things, so I talk about things like going places to train, such as in Pakistan, that required me to take on just a different thinking. However,
Mhm.
when I've really had to change is when I work with other trainers, and I love doing that, especially
Mm.
people who aren't CQ trainers. So we've got
Mm.
another purpose and we need to adapt. And the most fun I've ever had doing that is, as Quentin said, with a Lego serious play practitioner, Afshan Baksh in the UK. Had great time working with her. And people think through their hands, through doing. So it's a
Yes.
very different process to what's quite often maybe more cognitive or more you're doing short events, as Quentin said, that, you know, if then, so what are the scenarios that we might be trying? But it's quite a different process. It's a very creative, so that very much shifted it. So very much I say to people, speak to other trainers in different fields and think about how you can collaborate, because that in itself forces you to shift.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I know we're running short on time, and there's a lot of questions here in the chat from the audience. So we want to make sure that we give space to as many of these questions as we can. The first one I see here looks like it is from Jeffrey Cousins. I am a pastor in a multicultural denomination of churches in the UK. Welcome, Jeffrey. We have many first generation expatriates with entrenched ethnocentrism. How can I help all these people from different cultures embrace cultural intelligence?
Sure. So I'll try. And David Livermore's words are coming to my mind around, and I hope I'm quoting him correctly. But when he started out, he wanted to talk about similarities, and the first
Mhm.
person said, "No, David, nobody's interested in our similarities. We have to talk about differences. We need to." And he spent 20 years talking about differences. And in his last book, he started talking a lot about similarities as human beings. And I think that there's something in that, as I've engaged with audiences recently, to say, yes, there's a lot that divides us, but actually there's a lot that brings us together, and there's a lot more
Mm.
common rather than not. And we run a lot of story sharing processes in South Africa where we get people to share their personal stories. And through sharing those personal stories, what we find in people that are vastly different in the way they understand male, female, how they see their upbringings. But when I hear your story, there's something that says, you human, I'm human. There's something fundamental that we want the same kind of thing. And so leveraging off of those familiarities is one. And then the other thing, I think David referenced the Robert Cave piece of research where there's a common problem that we come alongside to solve. And so within the faith-based community, is there something that it brings us together that we want to solve a problem with? And the different cultures that come together there will bring different perspectives to solve that common problem. But yeah, so those would be the two off the top of my head: story sharing and a common problem.
One of the
Awesome.
programs I also work with, which I think builds on that also, is you're not going to do this in very quickly. It's about changing habits and ways of engaging. And I used to do volunteering work with an organization called CELIA, which is about constructive dialogue across difference. It's a fantastic organization, mainly with students. And we often learn to argue our case. You know, this is the theory for, and that's how we're rewarded in many education systems. And so there's a different practice where you're then going, oh, Quentin, when did you start to think like that? What did people around you think? So you go in with a kind of questioning mode, but it takes habit. So we would work with students over a semester, and it was quite a few weeks in before they maybe shifted habit of learning to be curious so that I can hear your story and your opinion, and I'm no longer fighting to be right, to have the right theory. And I think that's really important also.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. That's amazing. Vincent Bond, and thank you, Vincent, for your question. But Vincent asked about, how do we answer the CEO clients' questions? So questions like, what's the difference between cultural intelligence and the training that we do now that's not working? How do you position CQ from the lens of a CEO and make that compelling?
I think maybe my first question would be, what are they doing now and what's not working, so that you then understand what it is that CQ would be contributing to. And it's that bit around, one of the benefits of CQ is that there's over 1,000 peer-reviewed academic journals, papers on this. So there's a wealth of research. And then I think with the CEO, it's about what's the benefit of the change? How did they get behind it as the CEO? There's lots of different factors for making something land well. And I think there's something about you having the confidence to steer that conversation.
Indeed. And that goes back to that listening, right?
And questions.
And being curious and inquisitive on, again, what's important, what does that CEO feel is working and what's not working. In many respects, there's confusion sometimes that we think cultural intelligence is to replace. But really, cultural intelligence works best when it's integrated into what's already happening inside of the organization. And that's what makes it more familiar. That's what makes it more palatable. It doesn't feel like the flavor of the week, right? It's integrated into the existing culture. Carolyn, whose name I can easily pronounce, she asked, could we please hear an overview of Quentin's Lego activity or an overview of another specific activity that either you, Lucy, or Quentin have done to create the conditions for an aha moment for a specific group?
That's a great question. And both myself and Lucy have played with Lego in this space. and I'm trying to think of a moment that was an aha moment happens not rehearsed. It happens when something out of the ordinary happens, like you're in a position, you do something, and then it emerges. And a mistake that I've made is I've been with an audience, I've done this activity, somebody answered it this way, and so I try and recreate that moment for another group, and then it falls flat. And so what I've realized is that each group that I'm engaging with is new and unique, and that aha moment will come at a different point. And so sometimes the Lego Serious Play doesn't bring that aha moment, and it's in the checking. So one checking question when I talk about CQ knowledge is asking, I used to ask, remember it used to be triggering to say, where do you come from? People were like, oh, I don't like that answer. So, or like that question. So we changed the question to say, who brought you up? And that became a 45-minute conversation in the group around how people shared stories about who brought them up. And I never thought that that would be the aha moment for people, but it's about being curious and open and allowing the participants to drive you in a particular way. So like Lucy said, the Lego Serious Play is just about tapping into a different modality of learning, and people are playing with their hands. And it's when you, Lucy, I'm sorry I'm talking so much here now, but when you, facilitator or trainer, get out of the way, and it's less about you and it's about the participants. And my favorite moment is when the group don't need you anymore and they're on their own and you've almost disappeared as a facilitator. That for me is when the magic happens in a group. Lucy.
Oh, I was going to just say, yeah, that bit about setting a framework that you're not the key element of is often what's important. That, you know, that you're developing a framework for space for conversation that you maybe don't need to be participating in. You know, there's different ways, and to have lots of different elements in a day so that different people who come in different ways see things differently. Yeah. For me, when I've been with Avshan, the aha moment is often right at the start. We give everyone the same 6 pieces of Lego and ask them to build a duck, and every duck looks different. You know, I mean, it's only 6 pieces, and it's like that instantly gets to that nub of diversity and how things will be different for everyone, and I love that.
Indeed. I love that. Wonderful. Well, thank you both for your time today, your attention today. I know we're running short on time. So for those of you in the audience, we sincerely apologize if we weren't able to get to all of your questions today. So here's what we're going to ask you to do. One of 2 things, your choice. Either one, connect with us on LinkedIn. Make sure you're following the Cultural Intelligence page. It's not, if it's managed by humans. So please, if you've got questions we didn't get to today, please reach out to us and we will make sure that those questions are answered. Secondly, please send us an email. You can email us directly, also managed by humans, at info@culturalq.com. I know nowadays people are like, if I send an email, will it go out into the abyss? No, it actually goes to a mailbox that many of us have access to, and we'd love to have further conversations with you. Or if you'd like us to be a conduit and connect you to Lucy and Quentin, we're happy to do that as well. In these final moments, I'd like each of you, Lucy and Quentin, to share one final reflection with the group.
I'll go first because I want Lucy to have the last word. So for me, you're not alone in this journey, and that there are lots of people around the world that will journey with you. And what I found in the CQ community, people are really generous, and it's been an amazing to be part of this community.
All
Yes.
of that. And what I will also say is, I'm going to come back to those 2 questions. You're already doing something well. Remind yourself every time you do something, what are you doing well? What could you do differently? And connect with other people in the same space that you are. Any opportunity to network and to share. As Quentin said right at the front, this is how we learn. We learn, the opportunity is with other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Lucy and Quentin, for your time. Thank you, audience. You've been very engaged. It's been a pleasure. Again, please connect with us. Buy Lucy's book. Connect with the CQC Center. We can have further discussions to help you put CQ in practice. With that being said, we all hope that you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will be in touch soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.